Testing 1, 2. One, two, testing. Yes, here it is. Just setting up a few things. Testing 1, 2. 1, 2, testing. That's it. There we go. I am terrible at this. Oh, that's what smooth is for. Got it. Now, where shall we go today? Here as usual. The unmade bed. The tragedy of unkempt living situations. Hmm. I'm not doing something right. Bum, ba, 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 bum. Ba, ba, ba. Ba, 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 ba. Bum, ba, ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba. I could never get this right. Stream mode. Does that? Ah, there it is. Fantastic. Oh gosh, I am so. I've ruined my settings again. I'm twisting myself around, aren't I? Okay, there's a good reason why I'm doing this. And I'm sorry I've been away for like what seems like, goodness me, it's been 3 weeks since I've done anything. I was not doing the greatest the first week. Second week, I just didn't show up because I was just sick as. And now the third week, I'm. You know how it is. Well, actually, it was just me being all, hey, I've been sick. This is the reason why. I'm not doing well. My voice was terrible. And well, that's just the way things are sometimes. Can't do anything about it. Can't fix things. You just have to stick with it as it goes. And hello, I see you got someone in here. Just can't see who you are just yet. Because I can't figure out how to use this thingy. Hooray! Water. So I'm just going to sort of play it by ear and see how well I'm going, because if it's too much for me, I will have to stop. And I'm also going to try a little bit of a slower narration today. Normally, I'm always so excited, but if I want to practice the craft, I have to slow myself down, as it were. Okie dokie, let's see how we can get this to work. Da da da. Okay, I'll get started anyway. I'm a little late, but that's fine. Nothing is perfectly organized as in life, and you just get to see how things are. Let's see how I can. Mm, This is going to be a bit weird, but we'll see how it goes. Thank you, and thank you. Sherlock Holmes, Adventures, Chapter 5. The Man with the Twisted Lip. Isa Whitney, brother of the late Elias Whitney, D.D., principal of the Theological College of St. George's, was much addicted to opium. The habit grew upon him, as I understand, from some foolish freak when he was at college. For having read De Quincey's description of his dreams and sensations, he had drenched his tobacco with laudanum in an attempt to produce the same effects. He found, as so many more have done, that the practice is easier to attain than to get rid of, and for many years he continued to be a slave to the drug, an object of mingled horror and pity to his friends and relatives. I can see him now, with yellow, pasty-faced, drooping lids and pinpoint pupils, all huddled in a chair, the wreck and ruin of a noble man. One night, it was June '89, there came a ring to my bell, about the hour when a man gives his first yawn and glanced to the clock. I sat up in my chair, and my wife laid her needlework down in her lap and made a little face of disappointment. "A patient," said she. "You'll have to go out." I groaned, for I was newly come back from a weary day. We heard the door open, a few hurried words, then quick steps upon the linoleum. Our own door flew open, and a lady, clad in some dark-colored stuff, with a black veil, entered the room. "You will excuse my calling so late," she began. Then suddenly, losing her self-control, she ran forward, threw her arms around my wife's neck, and sobbed upon her shoulder. "Oh, I'm in so much trouble," she cried. "I do so want a little help." "Why," said my wife, pulling up her veil, "it is Kate Whitney. How you startled me, Kate. I had not an idea who you were when you came in. I didn't know what to do, so I came straight to you." That was always the way. Folk who were in grief came to my wife like birds to a lighthouse. "It was very sweet. It was very sweet of you to come. Now, you must have some wine and water and sit here comfortably and tell us all about it. Or should you rather that I send James off to bed?" "Oh, no, no. I want the doctor's advice and help too. It's about Isa. He has not been home for 2 days. I'm so frightened about him." It was not the first time that she had spoken to us of her husband's trouble. To me, as a doctor, to my wife as an old friend and a school companion. We soothed and comforted her by such words as we could find. Did she know where her husband was? Was it possible that we could bring him back to her? It seems that it was. She had the surest information that of late he had, when when the fit was on him, made use of an opium den in the farthest east of the city. Hitherto, his orgies had always been confined to one day, and he had come back twitching and shattered in the evening. But now the spell had been done upon him 8 and 40 hours, and he lay there, doubtless among the dregs of the docks, breathing in the poison or sleeping off the effects. There he was to be found, she was sure of it, at the Bar of Gold, in Upper Swandam Lake. But what was she to do? How could she, young and timid woman, make her way into such a place and pluck her husband out from among the ruffians who surrounded him? There was the case, and, of course, there was but one way out of it. Might I not escort her to this place? And then, as a second thought, why should she come at all? I was Isa Whitney's medical adviser, and as such I had influence over him. I could manage it better if I were alone. I promised her on my word that I would send him home in a cab within 2 hours if he were indeed at the address which he had given me, and so in 10 minutes I had left my armchair and a cheery sitting room behind me, and was speeding eastward in hansom on a strange errand, as it seemed to me at the time, though the future only could show how strange it was to be. But there was no great difficulty in the first stage of my adventure. Upper Swandon Lake is a vile alley lurking behind the high wharves, which line in the north side of the river to the east of London Bridge, between a slop shop and a gin shop, approached by a steep flight of steps leading down to a black gap in the like the mouth of a cave. I found the den of which I was in search, ordering my cab to wait. I passed down the steps, worn hollow in the centre by the ceaseless tread of drunken feet, and by the light of a flickering oil lamp above the door, I found the latch, and made my way into a long, low room, thick and heavy with the brown opium smoke, and terraced with wooden berths like the forecastle of an emigrant ship. Through the gloom, one could dimly catch a glimpse of bodies lying in strange, fantastic poses, bowed shoulders, bent knees, heads thrown back, and chins pointed upward, with here and there a dark, lack-lustre eye turned upon the newcomer. Out of the black shadows there glimmered little red circles of light, now bright, now faint, as the burning poison waxed or waned in the bowels of the metal pipes. The most lay silent, but some muttered to themselves, and others talked together in a strange, low, monotonous voice, their conversation coming in gushes, and then suddenly tailing off into the silence, each mumbling out his own thoughts and praying and paying little heed to the words of his neighbour. At the farther end was a small brazier of burning charcoal, beside which, on a three-legged wooden stool, there sat a thin old man, with his jaw resting upon his two fists and his elbows upon his knees, staring into the fire. As I entered, a sallow hmm. As I entered, a sallow Malay attendant had hurried up with a pipe for me and a supply of the drug, beckoning me to an empty berth. "Thank you. I have not come to stay," said I. "There is a friend of mine here, Mr. Isa Whitney, and I wish to speak with him." There was a movement and an exclamation from my right, and peering through the gloom I saw Whitney, pale, haggard, and unkempt, staring out at me. "My God, it's Watson!" said he. He was in a pitiable state of reaction, with every nerve a twitter. "I say, Watson, what o'clock is it?" "Nearly 11." "Of what day?" "Of Friday, June 19th." "Good heavens! I thought it was Wednesday." "It is Wednesday." "What do you want to frighten a cat? What do you want to frighten a chap for?" He sank his face into his arms and began to sob a high, treble key. "I tell you that it is Friday, man. Your wife has been waiting for this 2 days for you. You should be ashamed of yourself." "So I am, but you got mixed, Watson, for I only have been here for a few hours. 3 pipes, 4 pipes, I forget how many. But I'll go home with you. I wouldn't frighten Kate. Poor little Kate. Give me your hand. Have you a cab?" "Yes, I have one waiting." "Then I shall go in it. But I must owe something. Find what I owe, Watson. I am all of color. I can do nothing for myself. Uh, do, 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 do. I gotta get some water. And then, I walked down the narrow passage between the double row of sheep sleepers, holding my breath to keep out the vile, stupefying fumes of the drug, and looking about for the manager. As I passed the tall man who sat by the brazier, I felt a sudden pluck at my shirt, and a low voice whispered, "Walk past me, and then look back at me." The words fell quite distinctly upon my ear. I glanced down. They could only have come from the old man at my side, and yet he sat now as absorbed as ever, very thin, very wrinkled, bent with age, an opium pipe dangling from between his knees, as though it had dropped in sheer lassitude from his fingers. I took 2 steps forward and looked back. It took all my self-control to prevent me from breaking out in a cry of astonishment. He had turned his back so that none could see him but I. His form had filled out. His wrinkles were gone. The dull eyes had regained their fire, and there, sitting by the fire and grinning at my surprise, was none other than Sherlock Holmes. He made a slight motion to me to approach him, and instantly, as he turned his face half round to the company once more, subsided into a doddering, loose-lipped senility. "Holmes," I whispered, "what on earth are you doing in this den?" "As low as you can," he answered. "I have excellent ears. If you would have the great kindness to get rid of that Scottish friend of yours, I would be exceedingly glad to have a little talk with you. I have a cab outside." "Then pray send him home in it. You may safely trust him, for he appears to be too limp to get into any mischief. I should recommend you also send a note by the cabman to your wife to say that you have thrown in your lot with me. If you'll wait outside, I shall be with you in 5 minutes." It was difficult to refuse any of Sherlock Holmes' requests, for they were always so exceedingly definite, and put forward with such quite an air of mastery. I felt, however, that when Whitney was once confided in the cab, my mission was practically accomplished, and for the rest, I could not wish anything better than to be associated with my friend in one of those singular adventures which were the normal condition of his existence. In a few minutes, I had written my note, paid Whitney's bill, led him out to the cab, and seen him driven through the darkness. In a very short time, a decrepit figure had emerged from the opium den and was walking down the street with Sherlock Holmes. For 2 streets he shuffled along with a bent back and uncertain foot, then glancing quickly round, he straightened himself and burst into a hearty fit of laughter. "I suppose, Watson," said he, "that you imagine that I have added opium smoking to cocaine injections, and all other little weaknesses on which you have favoured me with your medical views?" "I was certainly surprised to find you there." "But no more so than I to find you. I came to find a friend, and I came to find an enemy." "An enemy?" "Yes, one of my natural enemies, or shall I say, my natural prey. Briefly, Watson, I am in the midst of a very remarkable inquiry, and I have hoped to find a clue in the incoherent rambling of these sots, as I have done before now. Had I been recognized in that den, my life would not have been worth an hour's purchase, for I have used it before now for my own purposes, and the rascally Lascar who runs it has sworn to have vengeance upon me. There is a trapdoor at the back of that building, near the corner of Paul's Wharf, which could tell some strange tales of what has passed through it upon the moonless nights." "What? You do not mean bodies?" "Aye, bodies, Watson. We should be rich men if we had £100. £100 or £100, I should say. £100 for every poor devil who has been done to death in that den. It is the vilest murder trap on the whole riverside, and I fear that Neville St. Clair has entered into it, never to leave it more. But our trap should be here." He put his two fingers between his teeth and whistled shrilly, a signal which was answered by a similar whistle from a distance, followed shortly by the rattle of wheels and the clink of horses' hoofs. "Now, Watson," said Holmes, as a tall dog cart dashed up through the gloom, throwing out two golden tunnels of yellow light from its side lanterns. "You'll come with me, won't you? If I can be of use. Oh, a trusty comrade is always of use, and a chronicler still more so. My room at the Setters is a double-bedded one." "The Setters?" "Yes, that is Mr. St. Clair's house. I'm staying there while I conduct the inquiry." "Where is it, then?" "Near Lee in Kent. We have a 7-mile drive before us." Lee. Lee. This is just a segue. North is on the Lee. I think this is in Ireland, possibly. They're talking about the Scottish. I don't actually know. This will be interesting. Bum, 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 bum. "But I am all in the dark." "Of course you are. You'll know about it presently. Jump up here, all right, John? We shall not need you. Here's half-a-crown. Look out for me tomorrow, about 11. Give her her head. So long, then." He flicked the horse with his whip, and we dashed away through the endless succession of... Excuse me. That came out of the blue. He flicked the horse with his whip, and we dashed away through the endless succession of sombre and deserted streets, which widened gradually until we were flying across a broad balustrade bridge with the murky river flowing sluggishly beneath us. Beyond lay another dull wilderness of bricks and mortar, its silence broken only by the heavy, regular footfall of the policeman, or the songs and shouts of some blast or belated party of revellers. A dull rack was drifting slowly across the sky. A star or two twinkled dimly here and there through the rifts of the clouds. Holmes drove in silence, with his head sunk upon his breast and the air of a man lost in thought, while I sat beside him, curious to learn that this new quest might be which seems to tax his powers so sorely, and yet afraid to break it in upon the current of his thoughts. We had driven several miles, and were beginning to get to the fringe of the belt of suburban villas. Then, when he shook himself, shrugged his shoulders, and lit up his pipe, with the air of a man who has satisfied himself that he is acting for the best. "You have a grand gift of silence, Watson," said he. "It makes you quite invaluable as a companion. 'Pon my word, it is a great thing for me to have someone to talk to if my own thoughts are not over pleasant. I was wondering what I should say to this dear little woman tonight when she meets me at the door." "You forget that I know nothing about it." "I shall just have time to tell you the facts of the case before we get to Lee. It seems absurdly simple, and yet, somehow, I can get nothing to go upon. There's plenty of thread, no doubt, but I can't get the end of it into my hand. Now, I'll state the case clearly and concisely to you, Watson, and maybe you can see a spark where it is all dark to me." Now, this is slightly interesting. The Because most of the time, Watson pretty much blatantly says, sorry, Holmes blatantly says, "Ah, can't you see? Can't you do this? It's obvious." Da 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 da. And this is the first time I've actually seen him say, "Look, I actually don't know what to do." He's in the bit of the dark. It's a bit of an interesting little thing, I would say. Um, just getting a drink of water. Do do do. Proceed then. Some years ago, to be definite, in May 1888, when there came to Lee a gentleman, Neville St. Clair by name, who appeared to have plenty of money. He took a large villa, laid out the grounds very nicely, and lived generally in good style. By degrees, he made friends in the neighborhood, and in 1887 he married the daughter of a local brewer, whom he now has two children. By whom he now has two children. He had no occupation, but was interested in several companies, and went into town as a rule in the morning, returning by the 5:14 from Cannon Street every night. Mr. St. Clair is now 37 years of age, is a man of temperate habits, a good husband, a very affectionate father, and a man who is popular with all who know him. I may add that his whole debts at the present moment, as far as we have been able to ascertain, amounts to eight, £88 10 shillings, while he has £220 standing to his credit in the Capital and Counties Bank. There is no reason, therefore, to think that money troubles have been weighing upon his mind. Last Monday, Mr. Neville St. Clair went into town rather earlier than usual, remarking before he started that he had two important commissions to perform, and that he would bring his little boy home a box of bricks. Now, by the merest chance, his wife received a telegram upon this same Monday, very shortly after his departure, to the effect that a small parcel of considerable value, which she had been expecting, was waiting for her at the offices of the Aberdeen Shipping Company. Now, if you are well up in your London, you will know that the office of the company is in Fresno Street, which branches out of the upper Swandam Lane, which you found me tonight. Mrs. St. Clair had her lunch, started for the city, did some shopping, proceeded to the company's office, got her packet, and found herself at exactly 4:35, walking through Swandam Lane on her way back to the station. Have you followed me so far? Yes. Sorry. Whoops. I completely went off topic there. My bad. It is very clear. If you remember, Monday was an exceedingly hot day, and Mrs. St. Clair walked slowly, glancing about in hope of seeing a cab, as she did not like the neighborhood in which she found herself. While she was walking in this way down Swandon Lane, she suddenly heard an ejaculation or cry, and was struck cold to see her husband looking down at her, and, as it seems to her, beckoning to her from a second-floor window. The window was open, and she distinctly saw his face, which he describes as being terribly agitated. He waved his hands frantically to her, and then vanished from the window so suddenly that it seemed to her that he had been plucked back by some irresistible force from behind. One singular point which struck her quick feminine eye was that, although he wore some dark coat such as he had started to town in, he had on neither collar nor necktie, which probably means that he sold it. Convinced that something was amiss with him, she rushed down the steps for the house was none other than the opium den in which you found me tonight, and running through the front door, she attempted to ascend the stairs which led to the first floor. At the at the foot of the stairs, however, she met this Lascar scoundrel of whom I have spoken to, who thrust her head back and, aided by a Dane who acts as assistant there, pushed her out into the street, filled with the most maddening doubts and fears. She rushed down the lane, and by rare good fortune met in Fresno Street a number of constables with an inspector, all on their way to their beat. The inspector and two men accompanied her back, and in spite of the continued resistance of the proprietor, they made their way into the room which Mr. St. Clair had last been. There was no sign of him there. In fact, the whole of that floor, there was no one to be found save a crippled wretch of hideous aspect, who it seemed made his home there. Both he and the Lascar stoutly swore that no one else had been in the front room during the afternoon. So determined was their denial that the inspector was staggered, and had almost come to believe that Mrs. St. Clair had been deluded, when, with a cry, she sprang at a small deal box which lay upon the table, and tore the lid from it. Out there fell a cascade of children's bricks. It was a toy which he had promised to bring home. This discovery, and the evident confusion which the cripple showed, made the inspector realize that the matter was serious. The rooms were carefully examined, and results all pointed to an abominable crime. The front door was plainly the front room was plainly furnished as a sitting room, and led into a small bedroom which looked out upon the back of one of the walls. Between Between the wharf and the bedroom window is a narrow street, which is a dry and low tide, but is covered at high tide with at least 4.5 of water. The bedroom window was a broad one and opened from below. On examination, traces of blood were to be seen upon the window-sill, and several scattered drops were visible upon the wooden floor of the bedroom. Thrust away behind a curtain in the front room were all the clothes of Mr. Neville St. Clair, with the exception of his coat, his boots. Sorry, with the exception of his coat. His boots, his sock, his hat, and his watch, all were there. There were no signs of violence upon any of these garments, and there were no other traces of Mr. Neville St. Clair. Out of the window he must apparently have gone, for no other exit could be discovered, and the ominous bloodstains upon the still grave little promised that he could save himself by swimming, for the tide was at its very highest at the moment of tragedy. And now, as to the villains who seemed to be immediately implicated in the matter, the Lascar was known to be a man of the vilest antecedents. But, as by Miss St. Clair's story, he was known to have been at the foot of the stair within a very few seconds of her husband's appearance at the window. He could hardly have been more than an accessory to the crime. His defense was one of absolute ignorance, and he protested that he had no knowledge as to the doings of Hugh Boone, his lodger, and that he could not account in any way for the presence of the missing gentleman's clothes. Hmm. So much for Lascar manager. Now for the sinister cripple who lives upon the second floor of the opium den, and who was certainly the last human being whose eyes rested upon Neville St. Clair. His name was Hugh Boone, and his hideous face is one which is familiar to every man who goes much to the city. He is a professional beggar, though in order to avoid the police regulations he pretends to a small trade in wax vestus. Some little distance down Threadneedle Street, upon the left of the hand side, there is, as you may have remarked, a small angle in the wall. Here it is that the creature takes his daily seat, cross-legged with his tiny stock of matches on his lap, and he is a piteous spectacle. A small rain of charity descends into the greasy leather cap which lies upon the pavement beside him. I have watched the fellow more than once before ever I thought of making his professional acquaintance, and I had been surprised at the harvest which he has repeated in a short time. His appearance, you see, is so remarkable that no one can pass him without observing him. A shock of orange hair, a pale face disfigured by a horrible scar, which, by its contraction, has turned up the outer edge of his upper lip, a bulldog chin, and a pair of very penetrating dark eyes, present which present a singular contrast to the colour of his hair, all mark him out from amid the common crowd of this is a word I've never seen, a common crowd of mendicants. A common crowd of mendicants, and so too does his wit. For he is ever ready with a reply to any piece of chaff. I don't know how to pronounce that one. To any piece of chaff which may be thrown against him by the passers-by. This is the man whom we now learn to have been the lodger at the opium den, and to have been the last man to see the gentleman of whom we are in quest. But a cripple, said I. What could he have done single-handed against a man in the prime of his life? He is a cripple in a sense that he walks with a limp, but in other aspects he appears to be a powerful and well-nurtured man. Surely your medical experience would tell you, Watson, that weakness in one limb is often compensated by exceptional strength in the others. Pray, continue your narrative. Mrs. St. Clair had fainted at the sight of the blood upon the window, and she was escorted home in a cab by the police, as her presence could be of no help to them of their investigations. Inspector Barton, who had charge of the case, made a very careful examination of the premises, but without finding anything which threw any light upon the matter. One mistake had been made in not arresting Boone instantly, as he was allowed some minutes during which he might have communicated with his friend the Lascar. But this fault was soon remedied, and he was seized and searched. Without anything being found which could incriminate him, there were, it is true, some bloodstains upon his right shirt sleeve, but he pointed to his ring finger, which had been cut near the nail, and explained that the bleeding came from there. Added that he had been to the window not long before, and that the stains which had been observed came doubtless from the same source. He denied strenuously having ever seen Mr. Neville St. Clair, and swore that the presence of the clothes in his room was as much a mystery to him as to the police. As to Mrs. St. Clair's assertion that she had actually seen her husband at the window, he declared that. Sorry. Apologies. I'll finish this up and I probably should stop talking. He denied strenuously having ever seen Mr. Neville St. Clair, and swore that the presence of the clothes in his room was as much a mystery to him as to the police. As to Mrs. St. Clair's assertion that she had actually seen her husband at the window, he declared that she must have either been mad or dreaming. He was removed, loudly protesting, to the police station, while the inspector remained upon the premise in the hope that the ebbing tide might afford some fresh clue. And it did. Though hardly found upon the mud bank which they feared to find it, it was Neville St. Clair's coat, and not Neville St. Clair, which lay uncovered as the tide receded. And what do you think they found in the pockets? I cannot imagine. No, I don't think you would guess. Every pocket stuffed with pennies and halfpennies, 421 pennies, 270 halfpennies. It was no wonder it had not been swept away by the tide. But a human body is a different matter. There is a fierce eddy between the wharf and the house. It seemed likely that the weighted coat had remained where the stripped body had been sucked away into the river. I do apologize for this, but I'm gonna actually have to stop here. I'm halfway through the chapter, and my voice is starting to go. I'm still not recovered, and it's best to rest. So I do appreciate you being here, all three of you, or four of you, however many I've got in here, because I still can't figure this one out. And I'm just going to have to stop, recover, get some rest, do some things. And I shall talk to you all next week. And I appreciate you all coming. Thank you very much. Sorry it's short, but gotta take care of myself. I'll see you next time.